Hello and welcome. The dragons understood something that took them tens of thousands of years to fully comprehend. Above the world of Eberron, 12 moons trace patterns through the darkness, and scholars who study the draconic prophecy have long proposed that these patterns hold significance beyond mere celestial beauty. The dragons watched the sky for millennia, seeking meaning in the movements of heavenly bodies, though the exact nature of what they discovered remains a matter of debate among modern astronomers and theologians alike. Before the dragons decoded the draconic prophecy, the world belonged to horrors that mortal minds struggle to conceptualize. You call them the overlords, the demon princes, the firstborn of Kaiba. They were not creatures in any sense you would recognize. They were forces of cosmic corruption given terrible awareness, aspects of entropy and malice that had existed since the progenitor dragons first divided the universe into its component parts. Rak Tulkesh embodied rage itself. Sul Kadesh was the written word turned to betrayal and dark magic. The devourer represented endless, insatiable hunger that could consume worlds. These overlords ruled Eberron for what myths describe as 9 million years, and their reign transformed the planet into a reflection of their own twisted natures. The Kuadils opposed them from the beginning. These serpentine celestials, the last children of Cyberes, had watched the overlords corrupt and destroy everything they touched. But opposition alone achieved nothing. The Kuadils possessed nobility and righteousness, yet they lacked the power necessary to permanently stop entities that existed outside the normal constraints of mortality. The overlords could not truly die. Destroying their physical manifestations simply scattered their essence back into Kaiba's depths, where they would eventually reform and return. The war between Kuadils and overlords stretched across ages, a cyclical nightmare where the forces of light achieved temporary victories that ultimately meant nothing. The overlords always came back. Always. The dragons changed everything when they discovered the draconic prophecy etched in the movements of the stars and moons. You might imagine this as a book written in the sky, but that simplifies something far more complex. The prophecy exists as patterns within patterns, cosmic mathematics that some scholars believe describe not just what will happen, but what must happen when certain conditions align. The dragons studied these patterns with obsessive dedication for thousands of years, mapping stellar positions across millennia and calculating lunar cycles that extended far into the past and future. Whether they truly understood cosmic laws that could be manipulated, or simply found patterns that gave structure to their magical workings, remains a question theologians still debate. The eldest dragons brought their discoveries to the Kuadils, and together they examined what the dragons believed they had found in the prophecy. The historical records that survive from this ancient time are fragmentary at best, preserved more in myth than in verifiable fact. What we know with certainty is that the Kuadils made a terrible decision. They would sacrifice themselves permanently and completely to create a force capable of binding the overlords. You must understand the magnitude of what the Kuadils accepted. They were immortal beings, servants of Cyberes, creatures of pure celestial essence. But the sacrifice required for the binding ritual meant something far more final than simple death. The Kuadils who participated would be erased as individuals, their entire beings fused into a Gestalt force that could bind the overlords like chains, made from the very concept of imprisonment itself. They would not ascend to some higher plane or merge with their progenitor while retaining any sense of identity. Within the force they created, they would exist only as part of a transcendent whole, their individual personalities subsumed into what would become known as the Silver Flame. The exact circumstances of the binding ritual remain lost to time, preserved only in fragments of myth that may or may not reflect actual events. Some scholars propose that the ritual required specific celestial conditions, moments when the barriers between planes grew thin enough for the Kuadil's sacrifice to reach across dimensional boundaries and wrap around the overlords wherever they manifested. Others argue that the timing mattered less than the sheer magnitude of the sacrifice, that hundreds of Kuadils, giving their entire existence, provided sufficient power regardless of astronomical conditions. The truth, if it can be called truth, after 100,000 years, likely combines elements of both theories. What historical accounts agree upon is this: the Kuadils sacrificed most of their number to create the Silver Flame, and that celestial force was used to bind the overlords deep within Kaiba, where their vast power could not break free. The binding was not performed by the Kuadils alone. Mortal heroes, including the dragon Xen'drik and other champions whose names survive only in fragments, played crucial roles in completing the ritual. This cooperation between celestial sacrifice and mortal heroism established a principle that would define the Silver Flame forever after. It is a force that cannot act independently, but must work through mortal champions to accomplish its purpose. The ritual, however long it took, and whatever celestial conditions may or may not have been present, succeeded. The overlords were bound, imprisoned in the deepest recesses of Kaiba, where even their vast power could not break free. They could still influence the world through their servants and through gaps in their imprisonment, but they could never again walk freely upon Eberron's surface. The age of demons ended. The age of dragons began. Of the thousands of Kuadils who had existed before the binding, only a handful remained as independent beings. These survivors had not refused the sacrifice out of cowardice or selfishness. Rather, they were assigned vital tasks that required incarnate guardians, missions too important to entrust entirely to mortals, and too long-term for mortal lifespans. These ancient guardians still exist in the present day, though they are extraordinarily rare and typically found only in the most isolated or dangerous locations, watching over secrets or prisons that have endured for 100,000 years. The dragons understood that their victory was not absolute. They had studied what they believed was the draconic prophecy deeply enough to recognize that bindings, no matter how powerful, could potentially be broken if the conditions were correct. The overlords would scheme from their prisons. Their servants, the Rakshasa who survived the binding, would work across millennia to engineer circumstances that might weaken or destroy the chains holding their masters. Scholars who study the interplay between celestial patterns and historical events suggest that every alignment of the moons presents a potential vulnerability, a moment when the cosmic forces that hold the binding stable might be disrupted if the right actions were taken at the right time in the right place. Whether this theory holds merit or represents overactive scholarly imagination remains hotly debated in academic circles. The dragons created the chamber, a secret organization dedicated to monitoring the draconic prophecy and ensuring that the overlord's servants never succeeded in freeing their masters. The chamber built observatories in hidden locations across the world, recruited agents from among the younger races as those races evolved and developed, and manipulated events when necessary to prevent the overlord's liberation. Whether the chamber truly reads an actual cosmic prophecy or simply uses astronomical calculations to justify their interventions is a question that outsiders cannot answer, as the chamber guards its knowledge with legendary secrecy. You live in a world shaped entirely by that ancient binding ritual. Whether the draconic prophecy that the dragons claim to follow truly exists as cosmic law or represents extremely sophisticated pattern recognition applied to celestial mechanics, the result remains the same. The overlords are bound, and they remain bound. Every empire that has risen since the age of demons ended has developed under conditions where those ancient terrors cannot manifest physically to destroy civilization. This alone represents an achievement beyond measure, regardless of whether it resulted from reading cosmic destiny or from the determined efforts of dragons, Kuadils, and mortal heroes who refused to accept eternal demonic rule. The Rakshasa remember what the dragons and Kuadils did. The lords of dust have spent the ages since the binding calculating and scheming, always working toward the moment when their masters might break free. They manipulate mortal civilizations like pieces on a game board, engineering wars and disasters that serve their ultimate goal of freeing the overlords from their ancient prison. Whether their calculations regarding celestial timing hold actual validity or represent their own form of obsessive pattern-seeking remains unknown to scholars who lack access to their secret archives. The binding of the overlords established one truth that cannot be disputed. Great magical workings can reshape fundamental aspects of reality. The Kuadils proved that with sufficient sacrifice and proper execution, even entities of cosmic power can be imprisoned. This knowledge would inspire other civilizations in later ages to attempt their own reality restructuring rituals, not always with successful results. The giants of Xen'drik, the goblinoids of Dakan, even modern nations during the last war would all grapple with the question of how far magic can bend the laws of existence before something breaks irreparably. The Kuadils who survived the binding ritual eventually found ways to continue serving even after their race had been all but extinguished. Their celestial essence could merge with or guide mortal souls, creating hybrid existences or offering divine inspiration that allowed them to act in the world while remaining hidden from the overlord's servants who hunted any surviving Kuadils. The role these remnant Kuadils have played in subsequent history remains largely unknown, as they work through mortal agents rather than revealing themselves openly. The binding established the fundamental dynamic that shapes all of Eberron's subsequent history. The overlords remain imprisoned but not destroyed, their influence diminished but not eliminated. The silver flame exists as a tool that mortals can wield against darkness, but it cannot act independently. And the great powers that understand these realities, the dragons and the Rakshasa, the secret societies and ancient guardians, continue their eternal struggle. The dragons work to ensure the bindings hold. The Rakshasa work to break them free. And mortal civilizations rise and fall between these two poles, sometimes aware of the larger forces at play, more often oblivious to the cosmic struggle that provides the context for their existence. The dragons who participated in the binding ritual eventually died, as even dragons must after enough millennia pass. But they passed their knowledge to younger generations before departing, ensuring that the chamber would continue monitoring what they believed was the prophecy long after the original members turned to dust. New dragons joined the organization. They built new observatories and refined their calculations. They discovered additional patterns in what they interpreted as celestial mechanics, finding meanings in the movements of the moons that the original astronomers had missed. The work of decoding what they call the prophecy continues to this day, and likely will continue for millions of years to come. Section 2. The giant's fatal calculation, severing Dal Quor from the celestial dance. approximately 39,000 years before the present day. The giant civilization of Xen'drik stood at the height of its power. The giants had spent 20,000 years building an empire that stretched across an entire continent. Their cities, rising in spirals of stone and crystal that dominated the landscape. They possessed magic that modern wizards can barely comprehend. Knowledge gifted to them by the dragons who had once seen potential in the giant race. They commanded elemental forces with practiced skill. They bred and enslaved the elven race to serve their empire's needs. But for all their power and accumulated wisdom, they would make a decision that threatened to destroy not just their own civilization, but the entire world. You must picture Xen'drik as it existed before catastrophe reshaped it. The continent stretched lush and fertile beneath tropical skies, its climate maintained by weather magic that the giants had perfected over millennia. Massive stepped pyramids dominated every horizon, each one serving as both architectural achievement and magical nexus. The giants had learned much from the dragons about reading patterns in the sky, though whether they truly understood the draconic prophecy or merely copied astronomical techniques without grasping their deeper significance remains a question scholars still debate. Then Dal Quor, the region of dreams, drew close in what scholars believe was its natural planar cycle. When planes approach Eberron during their orbital patterns, the barriers between dimensions grow thin, and entities native to those planes can more easily interact with the material world. Dal Quor's approach brought the quarry, the alien beings who inhabit the realm of dreams, into direct contact with Eberron through a planar gate that connected the two realms. The exact nature of this gate, and whether it was natural or artificially created, remains unclear in surviving historical accounts. The quarry came to Xen'drik, though historical records do not clearly establish whether they invaded with hostile intent or whether the conflict began through mutual misunderstanding. What is certain is that war erupted between the giants and the quarry, a conflict that would consume centuries and threaten the empire the giants had spent 20 millennia building. The utopia they had created came crashing down as the quarry forces, described in fragmentary records as possessing superior numbers and employing living constructs, pushed the giant defenders back across Xen'drik. The giants fought desperately against an enemy whose dream-based nature made conventional warfare difficult. As the centuries of conflict dragged on and the quarry continued their advance, the giant archmages concluded that they could not win through military means alone. They needed a solution that would permanently end the quarry threat. Drawing on the arcane knowledge the dragons had shared with them, the giants began developing what would become the most catastrophic weapon ever deployed on Eberron. The giant nation known as Sulat, facing the greatest pressure from quarry forces, made the fateful decision to pursue extreme measures. Their archmages corrupted the dragon's gift of magic with what surviving accounts describe as foul blood rites and brutal sacrifices, using elven slaves and even other giants as fuel for workings that pushed far beyond what the dragons had ever intended to teach them. These desperate experiments aimed toward a single goal: creating a weapon powerful enough to sever Dal Quor's connection to Eberron entirely, cutting off the quarry from their access to the material plane. The result was an eldritch machine that the giants called the Moonbreaker. This device, powered by magics that the giants themselves admitted were far beyond their ability to control, was designed to target and destroy one of the celestial bodies orbiting Eberron. The giants had calculated that destroying the specific moon associated with Dal Quor would sever the planar connection, ending the quarry invasion by making it impossible for the dream entities to reach the material world. Whether they fully understood the consequences of such an action or acted purely out of desperation remains a matter of scholarly debate. The moon they targeted was called Krya, and it represented the 13th moon in Eberron's celestial system. Historical records preserved in fragmentary form suggest that 12 moons correspond to 12 of the planes, while the 13th moon held some special relationship to Dal Quor's connection to the material world. The exact astronomical relationship remains unclear, as most records from this period were destroyed in the cataclysm that followed. The giants activated the Moonbreaker. The weapon functioned as its creators intended, striking at Krya with force sufficient to shatter the moon itself. As Krya disintegrated, the physical connection between Eberron and Dal Quor was severed, perhaps forever. The quarry found themselves cut off from easy access to the material plane. The invasion that had consumed centuries ended abruptly, as the dream entities could no longer manifest in Eberron with the freedom they had enjoyed during Dal Quor's close approach. The giant civilization was saved from the immediate threat, but the cost proved far higher than even the most pessimistic giant archmages had predicted. The destruction of an entire moon created a planetary cataclysm that shook Xen'drik to its foundations. Mountains collapsed across the continent. Gaping wounds the size of entire cities were torn open in the earth. Large portions of Xen'drik's coastal regions sank beneath the sea as tectonic forces unleashed by the moon's destruction reshaped the continental shelf. The sun's light was blotted out for a decade as fragments of the shattered moon rained down from the sky for years, spreading devastation across not just Xen'drik, but potentially affecting the entire world. The giant civilization survived the initial cataclysm, but it never fully recovered from the damage. The empire that had taken 20,000 years to build was shattered in the space of a decade. Entire giant nations simply ceased to exist, their populations killed by falling debris, or the earthquakes and tidal waves that followed the moon's destruction. The Sulat, who had created the moonbreaker, suffered the worst casualties, their heartland positioned directly beneath where Krya had orbited when it was destroyed. The dragons, observing from Arganessen, recognized immediately what the giants had done and understood the magnitude of the threat this represented. The giants had not merely won a war. They had developed and deployed a weapon capable of destroying moons and severing planar connections, reshaping the fundamental cosmic architecture that held reality together. And they had demonstrated willingness to use such weapons regardless of the collateral damage. The dragons debated for centuries about how to respond, understanding that the giants had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Approximately 1,000 years after the destruction of Krya, Xen'drik was still suffering from the magical backlash of disrupting Dal-Quar's planar connection. The continent had become a place of chaotic energies and unpredictable magical effects. The giant civilization struggled to rebuild under these harsh conditions. And then, according to dragon accounts, the giants made an even worse decision. They threatened to deploy similar weapons against their elven slaves, who had begun rebelling against their giant masters. The dragons concluded that the giant civilization posed an existential threat to Eberron itself, a civilization that would destroy a moon to win a war, and then threaten to do worse, to suppress a slave rebellion, could not be permitted to continue existing. The dragons had taught the giants magic in the first place, and felt at least partly responsible for what that knowledge had enabled. They made the decision to destroy the giant civilization so completely that it could never again threaten the world. What followed was destruction on a scale that makes the Moonbreaker's activation seem almost restrained by comparison. The dragons of Arganessen descended upon Xen'drik with no interest in holding territory, no concern for civilian casualties, and no restraint in the application of their power. They brought fire, fang, and what historical accounts describe as epic magic to bear in the most destructive ways imaginable. Cities that had survived the moon's destruction were reduced to rubble. The giant population was decimated, and when the physical destruction was complete, the dragons wove curses into the very fabric of Xen'drik to ensure the giants could never rebuild. The Durashka tool, one of these curses, causes any culture on Xen'drik that grows too large to be gripped by homicidal rage, tearing itself apart from within before it can achieve the organizational scale necessary to threaten other continents. The Traveler's Curse warps time and space across portions of Xen'drik, making reliable navigation and communication impossible in the affected regions. These were not temporary measures or warnings. They were permanent safeguards designed to ensure that the giants would never again threaten the world, regardless of how many millennia might pass. The elves, who had suffered through millennia of slavery and seen millions of their number threatened with destruction when the giants considered using the moon breaker against them, seized the opportunity to escape during the chaos of the dragon's assault. They fled Xen'drik in whatever ships they could build or steal, sailing across the sea to other continents where they would eventually establish their own civilizations. The elven diaspora that populated Eberron and eventually Corvair originated in this desperate escape from a dying continent. Dal Quor remained severed from its natural planar connection to Eberron, a wound in the cosmic architecture that has never healed. The plane exists in what scholars describe as a permanently remote state, close enough that mortal minds still travel there during sleep, but far enough that the quarry can no longer physically manifest in the material world as they once did. Whether this severance will ever reverse itself, whether Dal Quor will eventually return to its natural orbital pattern, remains unknown. Some scholars suggest the damage is permanent. Others propose that cosmic forces will eventually overcome the disruption the giants caused, though such healing might take hundreds of thousands of years. The quarry, trapped in a realm that could no longer properly interact with the material world, adapted to their new circumstances over tens of thousands of years. They developed techniques for reaching through dreams with greater subtlety than their earlier invasion had employed. They learned to create physical agents in the waking world by merging their essence with willing mortal hosts, producing the inspired who would eventually conquer Sarlona and the Kalashtar, who rebelled against quarry control. The quarry civilization transformed from invaders to infiltrators, accepting that they could no longer conquer Eberron through force, but might achieve dominance through patient manipulation, spanning millennia. One consequence of Krya's destruction that scholars continue to debate is its effect on the remaining 12 moons and their connections to the planes. Some astronomers propose that destroying the 13th moon destabilized the entire celestial system, making planar approaches less predictable and creating vulnerabilities in the cosmic architecture. Others argue that while the destruction certainly had effects, the remaining 12 moons continue their orbits according to principles that were not fundamentally altered. The truth likely lies somewhere between these positions, but definitive evidence remains scarce 40,000 years after the event. You walk through a world still shaped by the giants' desperate choice 40 millennia ago. Xen'drik remains a cursed land where civilization cannot take permanent root. Its ruins, scattered across a continent, transformed from paradise into a patchwork of dangerous environments that shift unpredictably. The dragon's curses persist with undiminished power, ensuring that the giants who survive there exist only in small, primitive tribes that bear little resemblance to the empire their ancestors commanded. And Dal Quor hangs in its permanently remote position, close enough to affect mortal dreams, but too distant for the quarry to invade as they once did. The giants saved themselves from the quarry invasion through an act of cosmic violence that killed millions, shattered a continent, and disrupted the planar structure in ways that may never fully heal. They demonstrated that mortal civilizations, given sufficient power and desperation, will attempt to reshape reality itself rather than accept defeat. And they proved that such attempts carry costs that compound over time, destroying not just the immediate target, but the entire civilization that deployed such weapons. Their ruins scattered across Xen'drik stand as monuments to power wielded without adequate wisdom, to victories achieved through methods that ensured the victors could not survive to enjoy their triumph. Section 3. Dakon's 7 millennia when the moons favored the goblin sword. Thousands of years after the giants shattered Xen'drik, the goblinoid races emerged as the dominant civilization on the continent of Khorvaire. The hobgoblins provided military discipline and strategic genius. The goblins offered cunning and adaptability. The bugbears brought raw physical might and ferocity in battle. Together, these 3 races forged the Dakani Empire, a civilization that archaeological evidence suggests controlled most of Khorvaire for thousands of years before its eventual collapse. You walk past the ruins of their cities even now, though you may not recognize what you see. Those weathered stone structures scattered across the shadow marches. And Droem once housed a culture whose military and architectural achievements remained unmatched until human civilizations developed millennia later. The exact duration of the Dakani Empire remains a subject of scholarly debate, as goblinoid records from this ancient period are fragmentary at best. What historians can confirm is that Dakon represented a functioning, organized empire with cities, infrastructure, and a powerful military that dominated Khorvaire for what some scholars estimate may have been as long as 9,000 years. The goblinoids built their empire through superior military organization and tactics that future civilizations would study and attempt to emulate. The hobgoblin generals who commanded Dakon's armies developed military strategies that scholars still analyze today for their sophistication. Whether they planned their campaigns according to any form of astronomical calculation, as some scholars have proposed, remains uncertain given the limited surviving documentation. What is clear is that the goblinoids possessed considerable organizational skills and maintained their empire through a combination of military dominance and effective governance that allowed subject peoples to maintain some degree of cultural autonomy as long as they paid tribute and provided troops when required. The goblinoids carved their knowledge and history into stone tablets that still survive in the deepest ruins of their civilization. Those scholars who have successfully decoded portions of these tablets report being impressed by the level of detail in Dakani record-keeping. Though the content focuses primarily on military campaigns, territorial boundaries, and lists of tribute, rather than on religious or philosophical matters. Whether the goblinoids possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge comparable to what the giants had developed remains speculative, as no clear astronomical texts have been definitively identified among the surviving tablets. Dakon's power extended across most of Corvair, with major cities positioned at strategic locations that gave them control over key resources and trade routes. The ruins that survive show impressive architectural sophistication, with precisely fitted stones and carefully engineered drainage systems that continued to function for thousands of years after the cities were abandoned. The placement of major Dakani cities reflects sound military and logistical thinking, though whether astronomical considerations also influenced their siting remains a question that scholars continue to debate without reaching consensus. The empire faced its greatest challenge approximately 9,000 years ago when entities from Xoriat, the realm of madness, crossed into Eberron. The Daelkir, immensely powerful beings whose very presence warped reality around them, led an invasion that would devastate the western reaches of Corvair and ultimately exhaust the resources that had maintained the Dakani Empire for millennia. You must understand that the Daelkir were unlike any enemy the goblinoids had previously encountered. These alien beings did not merely conquer territory or subjugate populations. They corrupted and transformed everything they touched, remaking living creatures into aberrations that violated every principle of natural biology. Where the Daelkir walked, reality itself became unstable, following rules that shifted according to Xoriat's mad principles, rather than the consistent physical laws that normally governed Eberron. The circumstances that enabled the Daelkir invasion remain unclear in historical accounts. Xoriat is described as being remote from the material plane most of the time, but during what scholars believe was a period when the plane drew close to Eberron, passages opened that allowed the Daelkir and their forces to cross into the material world. Whether this approach occurred according to some natural planar cycle or represented an anomaly remains debated. What is certain is that Xoriat has no corresponding moon in Eberron's celestial system, making its approaches impossible to predict through astronomical observation of the type that might track other planes' movements. The Daelker brought with them armies of creatures, created through their twisted mastery of biological manipulation. Dalgaunts, aberrations with 4 arms and tentacle clusters where their faces should be. Dalgrims, malformed beings that appeared to be 2 goblins, incompletely merged into a single body. Mind flayers, whose psionic powers could shred a warrior's sanity from a distance. These servants of the Daelker spread across western Khorvaire, corrupting and destroying the Dakani cities in their path. The Dakani military responded with the disciplined ferocity that had made them supreme on the continent for millennia. Hobgoblin generals marshaled their armies and marched west to confront the invasion. But traditional military strategies, no matter how brilliantly executed, proved inadequate against enemies who could simply unmake reality around them. The goblinoid forces found themselves fighting a war where their greatest advantages, discipline, tactics, and superior organization, meant little when the ground beneath their feet might transform into grasping tentacles, or when their own bodies began spontaneously mutating during battle. The war against the Daelker consumed centuries and devastated vast regions of western Khorvaire. The land that you now call the Demon Wastes and portions of the Shadow Marches were transformed during this period into corrupted landscapes where reality operates according to principles that still defy normal physical laws. Entire Dakani cities fell, their populations either slaughtered or transformed into additional servants of the realm of madness. The turning point in the war came not from goblinoid efforts alone, but from an alliance between the Dakani Empire and the Gatekeepers, an orcish druidic tradition that had been studying planar mechanics and developing magic specifically designed to seal breaches between dimensions. The Gatekeepers understood that the Daelker could not be permanently destroyed through conventional means, but they could be bound, and the passages from Xoriat could be sealed. The dragons also intervened, recognizing that if the Daelker corruption spread unchecked across Khorvaire, it might eventually threaten Argonessen itself. The combination of gatekeeper magic, dragon power, and what remained of Dakon's exhausted military forces finally achieved what none of them could have accomplished alone. The most powerful Daelker were bound in prisons deep beneath the earth, sealed away where their reality-warping influence could not spread further. The passages to Xoriat were closed through rituals that the Gatekeepers have maintained for 9,000 years, preventing additional entities from crossing over even during periods when Xoriat draws close to Eberron. But the victory came far too late to save the Dakani Empire. Centuries of warfare had shattered the infrastructure that maintained their civilization. The western regions of their territory, where the heaviest fighting had occurred, were permanently corrupted into wastelands where civilization could not take root. The goblinoid population had been decimated by losses that accumulated over generations of continuous warfare, and the trauma of fighting enemies that violated every principle of natural existence had broken something fundamental in the goblinoid psyche. The empire did not collapse immediately after the Daelkyr were bound. Historical records suggest that Dakon limped along for several thousand more years, gradually fragmenting as central authority weakened and successor states competed for dominance. By approximately 5,000 years ago, what had once been a unified empire existed only as scattered city-states that warred among themselves with the same ferocity they had once directed against external enemies. Within another few centuries, even these remnants had faded, and the goblinoid races had devolved into the tribal existence from which they had originally emerged. The gatekeeper druids, who had been instrumental in defeating the Daelkyr, maintained their watch over the seals they had created. Their tradition persists to this day, with druids still performing the rituals necessary to keep the passages to Xoriat closed even when that mad realm draws close to Eberron during its irregular approaches. The gatekeepers understand that their work will never be finished, that eternal vigilance is the only defense against entities that would corrupt all of Eberron into an extension of Xoriat. In the Demon Wastes, the region most heavily corrupted by Daelkyr influence, an orcish tradition known as the Gashkala emerged to contain the darkness. These orc, human, and half-orc barbarians patrol the labyrinth, a series of canyons that form the only reliable passages in and out of the Demon Wastes. And they kill anything that attempts to leave those cursed lands. The Ala believe they have a sacred duty to prevent the evil trapped in the Demon Wastes from spreading to the rest of Khorvaire. And they have maintained this vigil with absolute dedication for thousands of years. The name Gashkala roughly translates as ghost guardians in the Orcish tongue. These barbarians are not bloodthirsty by nature, but they are absolutely fierce in defense of their sacred duty. They maintain settlements within the labyrinth, fortified villages built into caves, and positioned on cliff faces where they can monitor the passages. The largest of these settlements, Gash Dar in the north and Maruk Dar in the south, have stood for thousands of years, their populations passing down the responsibility of containment through generation after generation. The corruption the Daelkyr left behind persists to this day. In the Demon Wastes and Shadow Marches, you can still find regions where reality operates according to Xoriat's mad principles, rather than the natural laws that govern the rest of Eberron. Aberrations spawned by Daelkyr experimentation breed and multiply in the darkness. The cults of the dragon below worship the bound Daelkyr as gods, seeking to free them from their prisons so they can complete the transformation of Eberron that they began 9,000 years ago. Deep underground, the imprisoned Daelkyr themselves remain aware and active, working through their servants and through the cults that worship them. They cannot physically escape the bindings that hold them, but they can still exert influence through dreams, through artifacts they created before their imprisonment, and through the aberrations that carry fragments of their essence. The Daelkyr are patient, understanding that they have eternity to work toward their eventual freedom and the completion of their interrupted conquest. You walk through a world still shaped by Dakon's fall and the Daelkyr invasion that caused it. The goblinoid races never recovered their former glory, remaining fragmented into competing tribes and clans that preserve only distorted memories of when their ancestors ruled a continent. The western regions of Khorvaire bear permanent scars from the invasion, landscapes corrupted into forms that will never return to normalcy. And Xoriat continues its erratic orbital pattern through dimensions, periodically drawing close enough to Eberron that the gatekeepers must reinforce their seals, and the Gashkala must increase their vigilance, always watching for signs that the Daelkyr might attempt another crossing. The Dakani Empire's destruction demonstrated that even the most powerful military force is inadequate when confronting enemies that operate according to fundamentally different principles of reality. Dakon's armies had conquered every conventional opponent they faced, but they had no answer for entities that could simply rewrite the rules of existence in the areas they controlled. The empire that had endured for thousands of years was broken not because its military strategies failed, but because military strategy itself became meaningless when fighting enemies for whom the basic assumptions underlying tactics and discipline simply did not apply. Section 4. The Dark Prince's vision. Galifar unites through conquest and compromise. Approximately 1,000 years before the present day, 5 human nations dominated central Khorvaire, each ruled by ambitious warlords who competed for supremacy. Kanath controlled the northeast with military discipline inherited from Kan the Conqueror, who had founded that nation nearly 1,000 years earlier in an unsuccessful attempt to unite all 5 settlements under his rule. Daskara held the north, its people increasingly devoted to the silver flame. Thaliost claimed the northwest, building academies where wizards studied the arcane arts. Rote sprawled across the south and west, its territory vast but poorly organized. And Metral commanded the south, combining cultural sophistication with military capability that made its neighbors both envious and cautious. These 5 nations warred intermittently, their borders shifting with each generation as one ruler or another seized temporary advantage. The conflicts consumed resources and lives without producing lasting change. A kingdom might gain territory one decade only to lose it the next, when succession disputes or economic problems weakened its position. Most observers assumed this pattern would continue indefinitely. Humanity, too, fragmented by old grudges and competing ambitions to ever truly unite. Then Prince Galifar of Canath, a descendant of Can the Conqueror himself, announced his intention to accomplish what his legendary ancestor had failed to achieve: the unification of all 5 nations under a single crown. In the year that would later be designated negative 12th year of the kingdom, Galifar began his campaign. Unlike Can the Conqueror, who had relied primarily on military force, Galifar understood that lasting unification required both conquest and compromise, both the sword and the extended hand. Galifar's first strategic move came 5 years before launching his military campaign, when he made a deal with the dragon-marked houses that would be formalized as the Korth Edicts. These agreements granted the houses enormous economic power and regulatory authority over their respective industries, while forbidding them from holding land, maintaining large military forces, or marrying into the nobility. In exchange, the houses agreed to remain neutral in conflicts between nations and to provide their services to Galifar's unification effort. This secured logistical advantages no purely military campaign could match: House Orion's transportation networks, House Canath's magical manufacturing, House Lyrandar's weather prediction, and eventually their airships, all supporting Galifar's forces while remaining officially neutral. Galifar also made strategic promises to oppressed populations within the nations he planned to conquer. He abolished slavery in his own domain and promised freedom to any who joined his cause, drawing significant numbers of goblins and other subjugated peoples to his banners. This simultaneously weakened his enemies' economies and strengthened his own forces with soldiers motivated by the promise of liberation rather than mere conquest. The campaign consumed 14 years of nearly continuous warfare, interspersed with diplomatic negotiations. Galifar was, by all historical accounts, a military genius whose tactical innovations and strategic thinking surpassed anything his contemporaries could match. But his greatest strength lay not in winning battles, but in winning acceptance for his rule after military victory had been achieved. He did not simply crush defeated nations and impose Canathi culture upon them. Instead, he largely respected local traditions and customs, allowing nobles who swore fealty to retain their positions and lands. Metrol fell first, perhaps because of its long and bitter history, with Canath dating back to Can, the Conqueror's original campaign. The conquest was neither quick nor easy, requiring more force than any of the other nations would eventually need. But having made an example of Metrol's resistance and its cost, Galifar found it easier to negotiate with Daskara and wrote afterward: Thaliast may have ultimately agreed to join Galifar with relatively minimal conflict, recognizing that resistance would prove futile. Galifar appointed his 5 children as governors of the conquered nations, renaming each region after them. His homeland of Canath remained unchanged, ruled by his eldest son Can. The nation of Thaliast became Onder, governed by Onder Urwinarn. Daskara became Thrain, under Thrain Urwinarn's administration. Rote became Breland, led by Bray Urwinarn. And Metral became Sire, ruled by Sire Urwinarn, though this transformation went far beyond a simple name change. In Metral, Galifar did something different than in the other 4 nations. Rather than allowing the existing nobility to retain their positions, he displaced them entirely, granting the old Metral aristocracy new lands far to the east in what is now Vaelnar. In their place, he built something new, a manufactured nation that would serve as the heart of his united kingdom, drawing on the cultural strengths of all 5 nations to create an ideal that embodied his vision of unity. This was Sire, and it became the first among equals, a source of pride for those who embraced the new identity, but a bitter pill for the displaced nobles of Metral who felt their heritage had been stolen. Some historical accounts suggest that the idea of unifying the warring nations came not from Galifar himself, but from his eldest daughter, Sire, twin to Onder. She imagined the 5 nations working together as a single family. Canathi military might, Daskari faith, Thaliast wisdom, Rote industry, and Metral culture, all contributing to something greater than any single nation could achieve alone. Whether this attribution is historically accurate or represents later mythmaking by Syrian historians remains debated, but the principle certainly guided how Galifar structured his kingdom. The campaign concluded in what would be designated Year 1 of the kingdom, though this designation came later. Galifar I ruled for many years after achieving unification, continuing to build the infrastructure and institutions that would sustain his united kingdom. He established the Arcane Congress in Arcanix in Onder, the Library of Kornberg in Zilargo, Reckonmark Academy in Canath, and granted each nation major institutions that built on their existing strengths, while also serving as cultural anchors and sources of pride. When Galifar I finally abdicated his throne at the age of 85, several of his older children had already died, and it was his youngest son, Sire, who succeeded him as the second ruler of Galifar. Sire's son, Galifar II, called Galifar the Dark, became the third ruler and instituted the calendar system that retroactively designated his grandfather's final conquest as Year 1 of the kingdom. This calendar reform established the framework that all nations of Corvair still use today, measuring time against the moment when Galifar I united the continent. Some scholars who study the interplay between historical events and celestial patterns have proposed that Galifar's campaign must have benefited from favorable astronomical conditions, perhaps significant lunar alignments that enhanced magic or influenced the psychology of populations toward accepting unification. These theories point to the unusually rapid success of Galifar's 14-year campaign compared to the centuries of inconclusive warfare that had preceded it. However, no contemporary historical documents from Galifar I's time mention any celestial events, visions, or astronomical calculations influencing his strategy or timing. The evidence suggests that Galifar succeeded through military genius, diplomatic skill, strategic alliances with the dragon-marked houses, and promises of a better society, all very human factors requiring no supernatural explanation. The story of Galifar experiencing a vision of the draconic prophecy during his campaign appears in some later historical accounts, but not in the earliest records. Whether this represents genuine prophecy, later myth-making to give divine legitimacy to the dynasty, or simple propaganda remains impossible to determine with certainty at this historical remove. What is certain is that Galifar achieved what he set out to accomplish: the creation of a united kingdom that would endure for nearly 1,000 years. Galifar's dynasty ruled from year 1 until 894 year of the kingdom, passing through generations that built upon the foundation their ancestor established. The kingdom grew prosperous and powerful, expanding beyond Corvair to establish influence across the seas. Art and culture flourished under conditions of peace that lasted centuries. The dragon-marked houses became wealthy, facilitating trade and communication across the unified kingdom. Magic advanced as wizards collaborated rather than competed, sharing discoveries that individual nations had previously hoarded as state secrets. The kingdom of Galifar became the standard by which all subsequent attempts at human civilization on Corvair would be measured. When people in the present day speak of the Golden Age, they refer to the period of Galifar's dominance, when a united kingdom brought stability and prosperity to the continent. Whether that prosperity was distributed equally across all classes and all regions remains a question modern historians debate. But the contrast with the last war that followed makes even an imperfect peace seem like paradise in retrospect. You live in the shadow of what Galifar built through conquest and compromise nearly 1,000 years ago. The kingdom that united 5 nations has now shattered back into warring states. But the memory of unity persists and shapes how modern nations understand themselves. The calendar still counts years from Galifar's unification, measuring time against the moment when one man's vision and determination reshaped an entire continent, not through destiny, or prophecy, but through the very human combination of military excellence and political wisdom, applied with single-minded dedication over 14 years of campaign. Section 5. The day of mourning when mystery consumed a nation. The kingdom of Galifar endured for 894 years before the dynasty finally collapsed. King Xen'drik, the last ruler to claim authority over the unified kingdom, died on the 12th day of Xen'drik in 894 year of the kingdom. His 5 children could not agree on succession. Miss Han, who by Galifar law should have inherited the throne, found her claim rejected by 3 of her siblings: Théoden of Thrain, Caius of Canath, and Roan of Breland. Only her brother Roger of Onder supported her claim to rule as Queen of United Galifar. What should have been a dynastic transition dissolved into continental warfare that would consume the next 100 years. The last war began in late 894 year of the kingdom, though historians debate precisely when informal skirmishes escalated into formal declarations of war. Each of the 5 nations that had once been provinces of unified Galifar declared themselves independent kingdoms, and each of Xen'drik's children claimed to be the rightful heir to the throne of all Galifar, not just their individual nations. The result was a century of conflict that would leave millions dead and entire regions devastated by magical weapons that pushed the boundaries of what wizards had previously considered possible or ethical. You must understand that the last war represented more than simple political conflict over succession rights. It became an arms race where each nation developed increasingly destructive weapons in desperate attempts to gain decisive advantage over their rivals. Breland created warforged living constructs built for war who could fight without rest or fear. Canath turned to necromancy, raising its dead soldiers to fight again as skeletal troops and zombie warriors. Thrain invoked the silver flames, blessing on crusades against its neighbors. Onder's wizards developed battle magics that scarred entire battlefields. And Sire, positioned in the center of Corvair, where all the other nations could strike at it, found itself fighting for survival against enemies on all sides. The war ground on for 100 years, consuming an entire generation in violence that seemed without end. Battles were fought and refought over the same territories. Cities changed hands multiple times as one nation or another achieved temporary advantage. The dragon-marked houses grew wealthy, supplying all sides with the infrastructure of warfare, while officially maintaining neutrality. Millions died, and still the fighting continued, because none of the 5 nations possessed sufficient advantage to force conclusion, and none were willing to accept terms that left them subordinate to their rivals. Then, on the 20th day of Olarun in the year 994 Dale Reckoning, something happened in Sire that changed everything. The exact nature of the event remains unknown to this day. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Eberron's history. What is certain is that at some point during that day, a cataclysm of unprecedented scale erupted in the heartland of Sire and rapidly spread across the entire nation. Observers watching from outside Sire's borders saw a wall of thick gray mist roll across the landscape with impossible speed. Everything the mist touched was killed or transformed. Within hours, the entire nation of Sire had been consumed by this expanding catastrophe. Millions of people died without warning. Their lives ended in moments. The few survivors, those who managed to escape before the mist overtook them, became refugees scattered across the other nations, homeless remnants of a kingdom that had ceased to exist. You call the region the Mournland now, and the name captures precisely what it has become. The gray mist that consumed Sire persists, hanging over the dead land like a funeral shroud. Within that mist, reality operates according to rules that defy explanation. The dead walk, but they are not truly undead in any conventional sense that necromancers recognize. They seem unaware of their own deaths, continuing to reenact the last moments of their lives in endless loops. Creatures that enter the Mournland and manage to leave often emerge changed, mutated by exposure to whatever force continues to warp the region. Magic behaves unpredictably inside the mist, sometimes functioning normally, sometimes producing effects completely unrelated to the caster's intent, sometimes failing entirely. The cause of the mourning remains unknown despite extensive investigation by scholars, wizards, and the dragon-marked houses. Theories abound, but none can be confirmed with the evidence currently available. Some believe Siren artificers developed a superweapon, perhaps related to the creation forge at making, and that the device malfunctioned or was sabotaged during activation. Others suggest that foreign agents infiltrated Sire and triggered a catastrophe designed to eliminate their most dangerous rival. Still others whisper that the dragons intervened, recognizing that the magical arms race had escalated to levels that threatened Eberron itself, just as the giants' weapons had once threatened the world. The Lords of Dust, those Rakshasa servants of the bound overlords, are also suspected by some scholars of engineering the disaster. This theory proposes that they calculated the mourning would create the kind of cosmic wound that might weaken the ancient bindings holding their masters imprisoned. Whether this theory holds merit or represents paranoia about an organization whose actual capabilities remain largely unknown cannot be determined. Without access to evidence, the Lords of Dust certainly would not share voluntarily. Some researchers have proposed that the day of mourning might have been influenced by or connected to celestial patterns, that perhaps certain planar alignments created conditions where whatever happened in Sire became catastrophically amplified beyond what its creators anticipated. These theories note that manifest zones across Eberron fluctuate in intensity based on how close the corresponding planes are to the material world, and that during moments of multiple planar convergences, the barriers between dimensions grow thin. However, no astronomical records from 994 year of the kingdom document any unusual celestial events on the 20th of Olarun, and contemporary accounts make no mention of astronomical phenomena that day. Without evidence of specific lunar positions or planar convergences, such theories remain speculation rather than established fact. What is documented beyond dispute is that the mourning ended the last war within weeks of Sire's destruction. The 5 nations that had fought for 100 years suddenly confronted the reality that their conflict had created conditions where an entire kingdom could be destroyed in an afternoon. Every nation possessed weapons programs that might produce similar catastrophes. Every military commander had considered options that pushed the boundaries of acceptable risk. The mourning demonstrated in the most horrific way imaginable what happened when those boundaries were crossed. The Treaty of Thronehold, signed in 996 year of the kingdom, formalized the end of hostilities and recognized the independence of all surviving nations. None of the 5 nations would achieve the dominance they had sought. Galifar's united kingdom would not be restored, but at least the killing could stop before another disaster created additional mournlands. The treaty also granted recognition to several territories that had achieved effective independence during the war's chaos. The Talenta Plains, Silargo, Cubera, the Lazar Principalities, the Emror Holds, the Eldin Reaches, Dargun, and Vaelnar all received acknowledgement as sovereign entities. The mourning created the largest refugee crisis in Corvair's recorded history. Sirens who escaped their nation's destruction scattered across the continent, carrying with them memories of what had been lost. These refugees, who came to be called the mourners, preserved Siren culture and traditions in diaspora, teaching their children about the nation that no longer existed except in memory. Every year on the 20th of Olarun, Sirens gather wherever they have settled to commemorate the day of mourning, sharing stories of the dead and performing traditional songs and dances to keep Sire alive in collective memory. Some mourners remember only the war, cursing the other nations for refusing to accept Miss Hand's legitimate claim to the throne, and thus beginning the conflict that ultimately destroyed Sire. Others focus on celebrating what Sire had been before the war, the jewel of Galifar, the nation that embodied the best aspects of all 5 provinces united under a single vision. The refugee experience has shaped Syrian identity in profound ways, transforming them from citizens of a powerful nation into a people defined by loss and displacement. The dragons who monitor Eberron from Arganessen undoubtedly possess theories about what caused the mourning. But if they know the truth, they have not shared it. The Chamber's agents investigate the mournland regularly, mapping its properties and analyzing how the disaster affected the region. Whether these investigations have produced answers or merely generated additional questions remains known only to the dragons themselves, who guard their knowledge with the same legendary secrecy they apply to everything connected with the draconic prophecy. The mournland stands as a monument to the dangers of escalating conflict and unconstrained magical experimentation. Whether the disaster resulted from deliberate action, tragic accident, or external intervention, the consequence remains the same. An entire nation destroyed, millions dead, and a wound in reality that persists 30 years after the event and shows no signs of healing. The gray mist still hangs over Dead Sire. The land within still defies natural law, and scholars still have no definitive answer to the question that haunts Corvair. What happened on the 20th of Olarun, 994 year of the kingdom? You live in a world permanently changed by what occurred on that day 3 decades ago. The political map of Corvair was redrawn, with Galifar's unified kingdom replaced by 12 recognized nations, plus the mournland that belongs to no one. The last war's conclusion brought peace of exhaustion rather than peace of victory, with all sides recognizing they lacked the strength to continue, and that continuing risked additional catastrophes none could afford. The Treaty of Thronehold created a framework for coexistence, but the resentments and grievances that fueled the last war persist beneath the surface, and many believe another war is inevitable once the current generation's memory of the mourning fades. The connection between celestial mechanics and historical events that formed the theme of this examination becomes more uncertain when applied to the mourning, where the binding of the overlords, the severing of Dal Quor, the Daelker invasion, and possibly even Galifar's unification can be analyzed through the lens of planar proximity and cosmic patterns. The mourning offers no such clarity. If celestial patterns influenced what happened in Sire, those patterns remain unidentified and unexplained in any historical records that survive. This absence of astronomical correlation might suggest the mourning resulted from purely terrestrial causes unrelated to planar cycles. Or it might indicate that whatever destroyed Sire operated according to principles that current understanding of celestial mechanics cannot adequately explain. The mystery of the morning reminds you that despite centuries of studying the moons and mapping their movements, despite the dragon's vast knowledge of the draconic prophecy, and despite all accumulated wisdom about how planes interact with the material world, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Reality can still surprise those who believe they understand it. Catastrophes can still occur that defy explanation, even after extensive investigation by the most knowledgeable scholars and wizards available. The 12 moons continue their eternal dance above you, tracing patterns that scholars believe hold significance for events on the ground below. Whether those patterns truly shape history, or whether observers simply find meaning in celestial movements, because the human mind craves pattern and explanation, even where none may exist, remains a philosophical question that cannot be definitively answered. What is certain is that empires have risen and fallen across Eberron's history, that some of those rises and falls coincided with identifiable celestial events, and that the interplay between cosmic forces and mortal choices continues to shape the world you inhabit. If you have found value in this exploration of Eberron's history through the lens of celestial mechanics and cosmic patterns, consider subscribing to Lore D&D for more investigations into the hidden structures underlying your favorite campaign settings. The moons will continue their movements long after we have all turned to dust. And whether they truly write the future or merely witness, it remains a question worth contemplating. Thank you for joining me in examining how the cosmos and history intertwine, how mortal choices and cosmic patterns interact to create the world of Eberron as it exists today. The patterns continue to unfold, written in the movements of 12 moons above a world where mystery still persists despite millennia of accumulated knowledge.